Welcome to the Great Telco Debate 2020. It's the third and final day, and we are live on TelecomTV and also streaming on LinkedIn. I'm Guy Daniels, and for the next hour, I will try and guide us through two debates with the help of my colleagues, Ray Lemaitre and Chris Lewis. Plus, the full TelecomTV crew is busy off camera making it all work. No, we're not meeting face-to-face in London this year, but we are still determined to give you the best possible Great Telco Debate experience. We've split the event over 3 days, Tuesday through to Thursday, and have featured 2 debates each day. So, for the next hour at least, set aside the pain of this horrendous year and join us for the Great Telco Debate. Our first debate today is cloud. Can hyperscalers and CSPs really play nicely together? Chris, what's the idea behind this debate and why now?
Well, Guy, throughout this year, we've had so much interest around what the hyperscalers are doing, how far they're reaching down towards the telcos. We talk about encroachment, building services that begin to look a lot like telecom services. In fact, if you want an analogy, in my head, I have this picture from Harry Potter of the Dementors circling above the telecom industry and swooping down to suck the life out of them. So the question on the table really is, can they play nicely together? Is it too late? Have the hyperscalers already taken too much of the telecom potential expansion area? Or are there things that the telcos can do to work well with the hyperscalers and build a future that supports this digital economy?
Getting a chill from the mere mention of Dementors. Thank you, Chris. Hopefully our viewers have already watched the panel discussion and witness statements. If you haven't yet seen these programs, then do try and view them later because they really add value and context to these live sessions. Of course, this being the Great Telco Debate, we have a motion. And our first motion today is telcos need to move quickly to stop the hyperscalers from encroaching on their turf. And as they have done every year, Chris and co-presenter Graham Wild were given their briefs and asked to set out arguments for and against. Here's a summary.
On the one hand, we've got technology at the core of networks, which the hyperscalers are very comfortable with and want to acquire. And on the other hand, it's possible for those technology providers to have direct relationships with end customers. And that really leaves the telcos with very little, just some fiber and some spectrum.
It's against the interest of all parties to be going after what the hyperscalers are doing. They cannot gain that scale. They cannot possibly work on that sort of level. I think in many ways that game is already lost, but we do need the emphasis on building that underlying infrastructure to make sure that we all remain connected, whatever the circumstances.
Well, before we find out how our viewers voted on the motion, we have time for a further round of questions. And I'm delighted that many of our expert witnesses have returned for our live shows. And we're also joined by some new faces, all of whom have plenty of views and ideas to share. Now, half of our guests are here with Chris and me, and the other half are with Ray. We've mixed things up to ensure we capture the energy and interaction of the Great Telco Debate. So let's welcome Johan Christenson, who is CEO of City Network, Jehanne Savi, SVP Innovation for Future Connectivity Business at Orange, Clayton Nash, Strategy Director for CityFibre, Nigel Stephenson, Director of Market Development EMEA, Telco and Edge Cloud at VMware, and Tim Kelly, Lead ICT Policy Specialist with the World Bank. Welcome everyone, good to see you all. Now it's over to my colleague Ray Lemaitre and his gallery of guests. Hello Ray, still looking festive I see, and all set for a final day of the Great Telco Debate?
Absolutely. In fact, somebody asked me earlier if I had fallen into a crunchy. And that's just the kind of sweet things that people are saying on the Great Telco Debate. And I'm very glad that we were all muted over here a little bit earlier on. Otherwise, you would have heard a cacophony of laughter with Chris's introduction of today's topic. But let's get on to the questions from our gallery of guests here, which are going to be the catalyst for today's debate. So first of all, I am going to come to a question from Patrick Donegan, who is founder and principal analyst at Hardenstance. So, Patrick, over to you for your question.
Thank you, Ray, and good afternoon, everybody. Yes, question I'd like to ask relates to the shared responsibility model, which in Cloudland prescribes that the cloud provider takes care of securing the infrastructure, but the enterprise customer taking care of the applications that run on it. That's a well-known model in Cloudland, and it works pretty well. I'm interested to understand what folks think in terms of the likely way that pans out in some of these edge and MEC deployments that telcos and cloud providers are partnering in. In those situations, the telco is liable to want to do the securing of the infrastructure, and everybody's going to find it a little bit difficult to secure the applications. And maybe there's going to be some more sophisticated thinking required as to how that plays out. Interested to hear what folks think in terms of the probable balance of responsibilities in those scenarios.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Patrick. Well, great question to start. The balance of responsibilities, that's what many of the discussions will have been about. So, Guy, back over to you, to the studio, to see if we can get some responses to that question.
Thank you, Ray. And also thanks to Patrick for the great question. Let's start. I think the most likely person to start with is Jehanne. Jehanne from Orange, why don't you have a first crack at this question from Patrick?
Yeah, rather than the security, in fact, I would mention and emphasize the quality of service, because what we are pursuing with the edge computing, and of course, mixing the synergy with 5G, it's the promise of real time and the promise of on-demand for the end customer. So my main concern is there, first and foremost, of course, not eluding the security standpoint, but first and foremost, it's the customer promise. We shall, of course, serve this promise end to end, and it means both on the connectivity side and on the cloud side, up to the application. So from my standpoint, it's the big bet there. And of course, each segment of the architecture must embed this capability, but we must also leverage the end-to-end promise. And here it's a real know-how, it's real tricky, and probably it's the one that will be able to orchestrate multi-cloud, multi-operator seamlessly. And so IT functions, IT application, as well as network functions, network applications. So it's probably this one that will take it all, I suspect. And that's the way we see it in Orange. And of course, one of the value segment we want to address specifically. It's also, I suspect, one of the strengths of the telcos. They are used to seamless interoperability and end-to-end promise. And here, especially, of course, it's key.
Thank you very much, Jehanne. Johan, as well, you'd like to come in on this one?
Yeah, just quick. I think it's going to continue to be like we've many times before have done, like where there's a clear-cut, standardized way of setting where these boundaries go, so to speak. But in the end, at the same time, some of that will be negotiated, right? And I think some of the challenges that come on here as well, in from a security perspective, is also the regulatory side. You know, we're traversing various markets, various countries, and so forth. So I think it'll be a challenge, but I think that while people will try to standardize it to certain levels in the stack, I also believe that you will see some of that negotiated.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's good to bring up the regulatory problems we're going to be facing here as well. Anybody else like to comment? Otherwise, we'll Chris, come on in.
I think this is indicative of we used to use the word convergence a lot, didn't we? The convergence of different formerly separate industries, and the fact that we're bringing together, especially at the MEC level, this compute, storage, and connect, and then bringing the applications in. We've got to have so much more transparency between the formerly separate parts of this digital ecosystem in order to deliver the service, in order to deliver the service, and of course, to Patrick's point, to secure the service as well. So there becomes a joint responsibility between all parties to be open. And we look at the things like the TM Forum's open APIs, where we're starting to see a lot more visibility through all sorts of different layers and across all sorts of applications. So I think it is unbelievably important. Security is part of everything that we do across this new marketplace, and whoever leads on it. And it also raises the question, who primes on those contracts? Telcos would like to prime on them. Hyperscalers would like to prime on them. Sometimes the applications players would like to prime on them. So I think this has got to lead to a lot more transparency between parties and really testing that partnership model.
Thank you, Chris. Ray, let's go back to you and see if Patrick's got anything else to add.
Well, there's plenty of people wanting to comment here on this topic over here in the gallery, and we're going to come to Danielle Royston of TelcoDR first. So Danielle, over to you.
Yeah, just to answer Patrick's question, the hyperscalers have had 10 years to harden their security. It would be absolutely devastating to their business if they were having security incidents on the regular of their own customers. But that said, I don't think a telco is going to be able to transfer the responsibility of a security incident over to the hyperscaler. Telcos will still be responsible for that. And so we still hear about security incidents when the customer of a hyperscaler doesn't configure their own dashboard correctly. There's been data breaches of these cloud customers. So at the end of the day, the telco is still going to be responsible for that end-to-end security and governance. And so it's their responsibility to understand how that cloud works, understand the configuration settings, and ultimately be responsible for that.
Okay, great. Thanks, Danielle. And also we've got a comment here from Kevin Hutchins from Juniper Networks. Kevin.
Yeah, I agree with Danielle's premise that the telcos need to take responsibility for security for those MEC-related applications, and primarily because they own the subscriber, right? They own the customer. They have to provide that level of responsibility. And I think there was a comment made before about the regulators. I did want to call out though that I think this is more complicated than just the telcos versus the hyperscalers, because you do also have the application developers that are going to bring their applications into the edge. And there's going to be a number of different types of applications that are going to be coming into there. I mean, if you really do think about the concept of self-driving vehicles and the security that's going to be required for that, I think we're going to have to think about a security paradigm that's going to be much more robust than what we've done in the past. And I don't think the shared responsibility model that the cloud uses today is going to be completely appropriate. It's going to require more, call it mission critical infrastructure level security type parameters that are going to have to be put in place.
Okay, fantastic points, Kevin. Thanks very much. Patrick, we'll come back to you to wrap up on this question. Any comments on what you've heard?
I shall pick up on the comments of Jehanne, if I may, for the lady from Orange. I admire in some levels, the ambition that she articulated in terms of the one that can do all of the orchestration will be the one to quote unquote take it all. I think that is going to be a fairly unusual position. I think Orange, however, if there are a subset of telcos that are going to be able to do that, I think Orange is certainly one of them. From a security standpoint, I rate them as amongst the most advanced telcos in Europe for sure. But I think I'm more minded to think that in most cases, most enterprises who are used to relying on cloud provider partners in the security space, in the applications area anyway, will be hesitant to rely entirely on a telco to secure the whole of that MEC environment. So I think, given that many enterprise customers will look at least as much to the cloud provider partners, if not more so, to provide security to the applications, I think the Orange position of wanting to take it all will probably be atypical rather than typical.
Okay, excellent. Thanks very much, Patrick. So a great start to today's great telco debate. We're going to come on now to our next question. And this question is from Marissa Viveros, who is Vice President of Strategy and Solutions at IBM Global Telecoms and Media. So Marissa, over to you.
Thank you, Ray, and good afternoon, good morning, everyone. My question, I did watch the panel and it was very insightful, yet there was a lot of discussions around infrastructure, who owns it, who doesn't, how you play with the hyperscalers, yet there was no discussion on data. And I believe data is one of the most important resources an asset. I know customer data is one of the most important assets, and that the telcos have to create intimacy with their clients, to create new business models, and giving the hyperscalers traditionally have been a master at monetizing other people's data. Are the telcos leaving an opportunity to be entities of trust in this new environment? In leaving an opportunity that really should help us. So, should they partner more careful, and should they take more concern on their data and see the opportunities that arise from solutions and data that will be placed, whether the core or the edge of the network?
Okay, great. Thanks, Marissa. And in fact, we've had a question on this exact topic as well from somebody watching the program today. So, Guy, over to you in the studio. The question of data here, absolutely critical.
Yes, thanks, Ray, and thanks, Marissa, for that question. And as you just said, we've got a question in live from the audience who's asking a very similar one. Is this not more a war for data rather than customers? Any of our panelists here would like to address Marissa's point of the importance and the criticality of data? Anyone like to pop first? Johan, thank you very much. Over to you.
Yeah, I'll jump in and comment, right? So I think as far as data goes, I mean, it many times comes with applications, right? Which means that you have the hyperscalers that sit on a huge advantage. For a long time, we've been talking about telcos becoming more of a bit pipe and, sort of like almost like an evil necessity into delivering that data to somewhere, right? But I think that the hyperscalers are the ones that control it. They're the ones that deliver the services around it. And thus also, managing security and the regulatory aspects from an infrastructure perspective. So I agree that the data is something that's incredibly important going forward. There's no doubt about it, but I don't see how the telcos will even play in that space, to be honest with you. It would require them to step up as a competitor, really, with cloud services that allows for that. And in the edge, there is a play for that, but it's probably the only play that telcos has. And it all depends on, of course, how much, the centralized part of that data will play out. And today it's still a centralized world. So I think it'll be a very tough game for the telcos to compete with the hyperscalers there.
Good insights. Thanks very much on that. Anyone else to pick up on the? Yes, Jehanne.
Saying that is a bit short, I suspect. And one of the most valuable data that we have in telcos is the location. And we know as important it is to have a trusted location, to manage the application at the edge in the right place, to be relevant and to deliver the performance of this application. So just to emphasize on maybe with a little point of humor, that we have this critical data there. And that's why also it's so important that we have the relevant APIs from the network to manage that properly. And as was said in the previous question, it's also a point of security, but in a concept that is not a one-fits-all security, but a more suitable security according to the data criticity. And that's what also we manage with this slicing, and it's real critical also that the security level, and it has been mentioned with the autonomous cars, that the security level is suited to the application needs. So I suspect it's real complementarity there, and we shall not consider that the data is the hyperscaler unique field.
Thank you, Jehanne. Let me go back to Johan, who just wants to come in with a comment.
Just a real quick on that. I mean, there's no doubt that the telcos have all the locations, right? If you look at the large telcos, they're far superior in the number of locations, and that hardware and that locations will be used, and that can be used, right? But I think it's not a matter of the ownership of the data or the management of the data. That will be done at a higher level with those applications, and that could be hyperscalers, it could be cloud providers like ourselves, that are actually owning the customer and delivering out there. Just like with fiber, we all need fiber and somebody owns that fiber, telcos many times do, will be the same in the edge. There's going to be a lot of hardware and a lot of locations that are going to be used. But I think, again, going up in the stack and actually take ownership of that and thus security and so forth beyond the lower level, which a telco many times does offer, so to speak, will not be the key play from the telcos.
Thank you. And Nigel, let's hear your views.
Yeah, it was just probably a little bit tangential in a way, but it just had me thinking, when we're talking about data, and I think here we're talking more about the protection or the use or maybe the value of data as being customer data, maybe application data. From a telecoms point of view, one of the big areas we're seeing around data is the use of data to run better services. So collecting data, the use of AI, ML, etc., to deliver a better customer experience. So I think there is a big conversation around data. I think from a service provider point of view, part of that conversation is about using data that helps you deliver a better service, which I think is slightly different from what we're talking of here. And then the other side of it, if it's customer data, if it's application data, then surely that sort of moves more back into some of the questions that Patrick was asking, where I would see the operator's role as securing and protecting and ensuring data. But also that's where you get into the, once it gets into the application, into the actual cloud infrastructure, then there has to be some kind of handoff, if you like, in terms of how data is protected and used within the context of the cloud infrastructure and the application. But the transmission of data, the holding of data, I actually see that as quite a big opportunity for the service providers to enhance some of their existing security services, but do so in a way that's more consistent with how the world is operating now in a multi-cloud way. But as I say, the main thing I just wanted to note was there is a big conversation around data, but I think the conversations we're having from a VMware point of view, it's more about using data and intelligence to deliver a better service and a better customer experience. And there's a whole conversation around collecting, analyzing, managing, and then implementing decisions based on that operational data.
Thanks very much, Nigel. Well, let's head back to Ray and see if any of Ray's guests want to come in on this topic.
Yep, great. Thanks, Guy. Yes, Danielle Royston from TelcoDR is itching to get in on this topic. So, Danielle, over to you.
I'm always itching to say something. I always have something to say. Yes, telco has super valuable data. I think Marissa's question gets down to the core of how valuable this data is and how the hyperscalers could potentially use it for their own gain in their own business. You got a retailer that would love to know where people are and what they're doing and what they're buying on their phones. And you got a search company and an ad company that would love to market things to them as well in both Amazon and Google. But there are other industries that have hugely valuable data, like banking, right? How much money you have in your accounts and where those accounts are located. Just yesterday, Capital One published a talk at AWS reInvent, where they talked about how they shut down 8 of their data centers over the last 8 years and moved all of their applications to the public cloud. And so banking, I think, is also highly regulated, great, valuable data, and they're going all in. And I think once you spend even 30 minutes with a hyperscaler to understand their security story, you get over these concerns of them using the data for their business. It would be hugely distrustful if they started to use your data. And so let's talk about Google really briefly about their 5 layers of security, right? And I'm just going to talk about a few of them, which is contractually, they say they won't touch their data. They automate any touches to your data, and you can ask for those logs whenever you want. And so they've just built in, bring your own encryption key. Your data is encrypted by default. Your data is encrypted in motion. Your data is encrypted at rest. Google Cloud Next announced in July confidential VMs, which is, encryption and confidentiality while it's in motion, right? While it's being processed. And so I just think that's not what they're after. It's a completely separate business. It's a cloud service. And if they started tearing into your data and started using it for their advantage, not only would they have a problem with telco, they'd have a problem across all of their customers. And that's what they're interested in. They're interested in providing infrastructure as a service. They're starting to do more software and business applications as a service, and they cannot go into your data. That would be just hugely damaging to a very valuable asset. So I just don't think that's what's going on. I think you can trust them.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Danielle. Yeah, Marissa, let's come back to you for some closing comments on this.
Yes, so I really appreciate all the insightful comments from everyone. And I know this is a topic that we should be including more in our conversation as we speak to cloud, as we speak to 5G, and all the new technologies and edge computing. I just want to make one more point where I think I'm very passionate about this topic because I think with 5G, that the ownership and what we can do with the data, it becomes even more critical. So I know many telcos want to serve manufacturing companies, automotive, healthcare, and there will be a lot more information collected through devices at the edge. We talk about hyperlocal. There will be much more data collected. Therefore, we need to pay even more attention about how that data gets monetized, who owns what, and who is accountable at the end of the day, in having the overall governance over that data. So I really appreciate all the insight. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Marissa. Okay, time has moved me on, but we still want to get to a few more questions on the whole hyperscaler telco topic. So let's come to Danielle Royston, CEO and founder of TelcoDR next. Danielle, what is your question?
So one of our experts said that there would be a need for a regional cloud player to serve just like a particular area, like a continent, because specific regulations and security requirements. Yet the hyperscalers continue to expand their footprint into different countries. AWS has 8 regions with 3 availability zones each and 23 edge locations in Europe alone. So don't you think the hyperscalers have the resources to comply with all the regulations so they can compete in what is their primary business objective, which is to be a global cloud provider, and they will do the work necessary to win the continent?
Okay, thanks, Danielle. So over to you, Guy, the whole regional global debate here and who the telcos might, I guess, prefer to partner with.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Danielle. I'm pretty sure that Johan would like to jump straight into this one.
Yes, I certainly do, right? So it's a hot topic, particularly here in Europe, right? So it has little to do with resources, even though resources in certain instances can help. We're talking about issues around laws that we call national laws that could potentially affect nations all over the world. Whether you're a Chinese provider or a US provider or a European provider, you have laws that you have to abide by. If you take those particular ones that we're talking a lot about, AWS and Azure and so forth, you have FISA, for example, which is a very, very detrimental law when it comes from a European perspective. You have Executive Order 12333, you have Cloud Act. You have a bunch of things that are set up to gather data. And that means that it doesn't necessarily even allow somebody with resources to actually comply because they have to adhere to certain laws. And that is something that allows, for example, GDPR doesn't work and a host of other types of laws around that. And just to have a comment on Danielle there as far as the laws goes and, trust and security, of course, we hear article after article about how Amazon uses data in a way that shouldn't be used. Customer for example, that are selling on their platform. All of a sudden, they use that data to sell their own platforms. There's a lot of things I think we all have to realize here that, we're growing up with data, significant data, where we're realizing the value as well as the damage that it does, can do to somebody, right? And I think, the hyperscalers have shown many times over that trust is not necessarily something that one should take lightly. And that comes from a security aspect as well in many senses. But, if you cannot adhere to the laws, it'll be very difficult to say that anything is secure at that point, because data will be taken from you, from different nations, wherever that they might adhere to.
Great points. Thanks very much, Johan. I think in the interest of getting another question in, I think, Ray, we're going to hand straight back to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Guy. We're going to get a couple of brief comments here from the gallery guests. First from Mark Newman, Chief Analyst at TM Forum. Mark, over to you.
Thanks, Ray. Really just a quick observation from me. I spent the last 4 mornings getting up at 5:30 a.m. to do some strategy sessions with a telco in Qatar. And I've been talking a lot with them about approaches towards using cloud. Their nearest public cloud is in Bahrain. And there's not been a huge take-up from it from the enterprise sector, so it would appear. And this telco is doing pretty well selling its own private cloud services, even though you have Amazon in Bahrain. So that's interesting. So there are many parts of the world where I see telcos who are actually making a fairly good stab at moving into particularly the infrastructure as a service market, because the public cloud companies aren't landing on their territory, and there's also quite strict rules in terms of privacy as well and sending data overseas. So it's really just an observation rather than a question.
Okay, great, but a very good observation, Mark. Thanks very much. And Danielle, we'll come back to you to close on this topic, because I'm sure you've got some comments on what you've heard.
Yeah, I think that, building your own public cloud and building your own infrastructure is not a, 30-minute, 30-day task. I mean, that is a 5-year, 10-year kind of investment. When you look at the long arc of time in terms of the hyperscalers' resources to be able to either build out the data centers in different locations, but also the time of country changing their mind on the different regulations. I think these problems get solved when you think about 10 years out and 5 years out. They may not be solved today. And the ability to, most of the hyperscalers allow you to control the granularity of where your data is stored. You can store it, as long as there is a data center in your location, you can control it to stay in your country. And so I think for most countries, they can use hyperscaler resources and get around these regulations and stand on the shoulders of giants. So I continue to be in violent disagreement that you got to go build your own thing. You got to leverage the public cloud, right? And stand on the shoulders of giants.
Excellent. I would expect to hear nothing else from you, Danielle. Thanks very much for that closing comment. Okay, we're going to move on. Time is pressing on, so we're going to come to our next question. And that is from Kevin Hutchins, who is SVP of Strategy and Corporate Development at Juniper Networks. So, Kevin, over to you.
Thanks, Ray. Thanks for the opportunity. I think telcos, as part of this core question that we're talking about, I mean, we're certainly, I think, trying to put an argument together about how they can play together, or are they going to be competitive? And I think, it is a question of where will they be competitive? And so it does seem reasonable, given the strength of the hyperscalers with their strength in centralized infrastructure, just per the last question, that collaboration between the telcos leveraging the hyperscale infrastructure for things like their core makes a lot of sense. But I guess my question is, if the telcos give up the edge to the hyperscalers, they're giving away really one of their big advantages and one of their main drivers of value. For example, I mean, if you think about a cloud agnostic edge, bringing developers into the edge to bring new applications there's a lot of opportunity that the telcos would be giving away to the cloud providers. So my question is, why would it make sense for the telcos to bring the hyperscalers into the edge? why wouldn't they build their own cloud agnostic edge, from an infrastructure perspective that they can control, and then invite the hyperscalers to come in and partner? And just one addition there, I think my thesis is I don't think the hyperscalers have a big advantage when you get into more of a location-driven type play. I think that's their strength is really in centralized scale, frankly. So why would the telcos give that away?
Okay, excellent. Well, I think this is one of the critical questions in that relationship between telcos and hyperscalers. So, Guy, over to you. What do the folks at your end of the debate think of this?
Thank you, Ray, and thanks, Kevin, for the question. And straight over to Nigel for his comments.
Yeah, I think this touches on something that we discussed in the panel session ahead of this Q&A. I think, I said then, I think something like, this is for the communication service providers to lose. And by that, I mean, at the moment, there's a real need for service providers to be part of the solution. So the hyperscalers can come in, they can provide, if you like, the filling in the pie, right? You buy the pie to get the filling, not the surround. And the filling is really the hyperscaler piece as it's currently being positioned at the edge in terms of the services and the application angle. However, if the service providers play a role in that, they're a necessary part right now. That need not always be the case. But if they accept that and they partner now to be part of the solution, they have the potential to learn from that and strategize around what else they can do. And I think that touches on Kevin's point. So I think there's a kind of a short-term stay part of the solution, be part of the game, but then there's a need to develop beyond that. And if I think of it the other way around, what are the hyperscalers getting out of the relationship in terms of edge services and MEC? I think there's two things, right? There is the physical connectivity, the last mile. There is that connectivity piece. I don't think that could not be done a different way if they really wanted to, but I don't think it's in their interest. And there is potentially customer relationships, because undoubtedly, service providers have got some very good customer relationships, and that represents, if you like, an upside in terms of selling edge services for the hyperscaler. But the real thing is that the physicality of it and the connectivity aspect, especially as you get down to the last mile. So I think it is about staying in the game, leveraging it for what it is today, which has got genuine value, I think, on both sides, but also understanding and strategizing around what is it going to lead to. And that could well be that kind of almost sort of neutral network type approach to say, let's manage an environment that people like hyperscalers and enterprise development teams and others can come into and use that to develop things that we don't yet know. The other comment I would make, I think it was mentioned the idea of taking some of the functions of the service provider and moving them into the cloud. I think there is a degree of that. Like any large enterprise, there are values of moving stuff onto a public cloud. But we also need to temper that a little bit. If the service providers, if the communication service providers move everything into the cloud, are they even communication service providers anymore? Yeah, so there's an element of saying, the thing that differentiates the communication service provider is the physical infrastructure. That's the thing you have to make money out of. If you're not making money out of the physical infrastructure, then I don't think you're really a service provider in the way that we have seen them up until now. And maybe that's a transition, maybe that's a shift. But I think you really have to focus on the fact that that's the core asset. So maximizing value from it has to be the key.
Yeah. Nigel, I think we'll follow that one up next year in a lot of our DSP leaders programming. Jehanne, would you like to come in with a quick comment to end this segment?
Yeah, I fully agree with what has just been said. I think that, of course, it's a nice play today between us. We are in a pragmatic approach where we acknowledge that edge computing is just the continuum of the cloud computing today. And of course, the hyperscalers bring the ecosystem, brings the application environment, but also the developers, the marketplace, and so on, which is critical for developing this new business, because we say we have a growth opportunity there in terms of business, thanks to brand new use cases. But at this stage, quasi, they do not exist, right? So they need these applications to provide this real time and so on. And so they need to be created, to be developed. And so we leverage the notoriety and the ecosystem of the hyperscalers. It's very pragmatic. And what has just been said, and I fully agree, it's that it's not exclusive, right? So as a second step, we may also think about other solutions, maybe leverage our Telco cloud, which is a sidekick, and also think about more sovereign solutions. We have talked previously about the equation of state requirements and so on. And so maybe sovereign solutions are a bit also specific. So we will also enhance the value proposition, enhance the offer, thanks to that in the next step. So in a nutshell, I'm quite aligned with what has been said, and I was willing to add these points.
Thank you very much. Well, we should head straight back to Ray.
Okay, thanks so much, Guy. We're going to have a quick comment from Danielle Royston, and then we'll go back to Kevin for some final comments. So, Danielle.
Here comes DR, right? Like I can't resist commenting on every single question. But with 5G, before 5G, our big challenge was the latency between the handset and the tower. And that's really been solved. And now the new problem in bringing all these great applications and great opportunities for the telcos to monetize 5G is now the latency between the tower and the data center. And it's pretty difficult to build data centers that are hyper local to every single tower, so you can get the advantage of compute and storage if necessary. And I think that's really where AWS's wavelength and outpost comes in. That allows you to put literally a little baby rack that's AWS, that's managed by AWS, hyper local to tower locations, and start to really roll out these amazing applications and monetize 5G. And we keep talking about how are we going to monetize 5G? Where's the money coming from? We're not getting it. We're not getting it from subscribers. And so I really think, again, standing on the shoulders, why is it important that telcos manage the entire stack? Why are we buying servers? Why are we figuring out all the security requirements? That's already been figured out by the hyperscalers. So give up the plumbing, right? They love this, right? They love it, right? Let them keep it. And your value add is the applications that you're bringing and the better experience to your subscriber. You own the subscriber relationship, own that, make it great, build up loyalty, and you'll be able to get all the monetization that you need to fund future Gs. So that's my take.
Okay, excellent. And there's proof that this show is live right there. So we're going to come to a quick comment from Marissa, and then back to Kevin for a final comment. So Marissa.
Yeah, so quick comment on Kevin's question. What we are experiencing from an IBM perspective and a Red Hat perspective is that the majority of the CSPs wants to monetize 5G on the edge on the enterprise. Therefore, it's a different kind of partners that you need in order to do that. And I believe there are other companies that better positioned than hyperscalers to really go and leverage and try to address the market. Different issues, you need to have an industry expertise in order to really address the market. So the edge, I think it will be a different kind of application that we will see besides the common subscriber video and so on. But I think the focus is on enterprise because that's where the monetization can happen with 5G and edge computing. So back to you, Ray.
Okay, great. Thank you, Marissa. And Kevin, a final comment on this.
Well, Ray, now that I know we can swear, I can probably change my comment. But no, the only last thing I would say is I think some of the points that were made are valid ones. But like, if, for example, if I'm a telco and I bring Amazon into my edge with either wavelength or outpost, What do I do about all the Microsoft customers, right? That want to use the Microsoft environment. What do I do about all the Google customers? We know that they're very competitive with each other. And there's a lot of applications that, are we're going to want to bring to our subscribers in the edge. I think that really is the opportunity. I agree with Marissa that I think it's a different type of data center design that would be, or just edge compute. There's a different type of design that you have to think about. I don't think the hyperscalers have the God-given right to that opportunity. I think there's still a lot of opportunity for innovation there. And it's really up to the telcos whether or not they want to see that opportunity. I think Nigel said it very well. So that no swearing, but that's my final comment.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Kevin. I think it's amazingly we're already 45 minutes into the great telco debate, and we need to come to the point where we take another look at the motion and get a sense for what our speakers here are thinking today. So I'm going to read out the motion, and then we're going to look for a quick vote from our gallery guests here today. So a reminder of the motion: it is telcos need to move quickly to stop the hyperscalers from encroaching on their turf. So for my gallery guests, can we get a thumbs up if you're in favor of that motion, or thumbs down? The motion again: telcos need to move quickly to stop the hyperscalers from encroaching on their turf. Okay, we have kind of a split. We've got a 3-2, but 3-2 in favor of the motion here, Guy. Over to you. Let's find out what your guests have to say or think about this motion.
Well, thank you, Ray. A split, that's very interesting. Let's have a quick count here then, and let's ask our guests in the studio here what we all think. The motion again: telcos need to move quickly to stop the hyperscalers from encroaching on their turf. Thumbs up if we agree, thumbs down if we disagree. Right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 so far.
Whoa,
6.
full house.
And Chris, is Chris going to come in with one? Oh, no, Chris is on the fence again. Oh, no, not even from Chris. Well, look, we think it's yes, but that's what we think. But the most important aspect of this is, what does our audience think? Did our audience agree with the motion? Was the motion carried? Was it defeated? Well, it's time for the industry to decide. Well, there you go. Motion defeated by a decent margin. Chris, the vote was 63% to 37%. That really surprises me. Chris, we heard your arguments against the motion earlier. What do you think of the result?
I think, as I made in the summary comments there, you had me saying the battle is lost. I think the power of the hyperscalers is such that they are so much in people's minds to help deliver services, both to consumers and to the business market. They are encroaching more and more on the turf of the telcos, and it is finally pushing the telcos to that position of being the utility bandwidth provider that, frankly, we've been talking about for the last 20 years.
Well, thank you, Chris. And personally, I'm flabbergasted. The motion wasn't will hyperscalers encroach. It was concerned with how quickly telcos need to react. And the industry audience clearly doesn't think telcos need to move quickly here at all. Does that show confidence that there's still time for the telcos to show up their defenses, or probably, more likely, have they completely underestimated the speed at which hyperscalers are capable of moving and the scale of their ambitions? Ray, any thoughts from you on the verdict?
Yeah, I think you could read this two ways. This could be a short-term thing with a view to some longer-term strategic thinking. All I can say is I'm very glad that once again we had some mute buttons going on here, because there was some very loud cheering at that audience vote from some members of the gallery here. I'm sure you can guess who. Okay, back to you, Guy.
Yes, a partisan crowd. Thank you, Ray. That concludes the first debate, but don't go away, because we promised you 2 debates today. So moving on with hyperscaler speed and agility, let's get straight into our second and final debate, which focuses on investment and asks the question, how will the DSP of tomorrow be funded? Chris, I'll ask you again, as we have done all week here, to set up the discussion. Why are we having this conversation now? What's at stake for the industry?
Well, Guy, as ever, the question is, how do we How do we pay for things? Where do we get the investment from? Where do telcos put that investment going forward? And the fact is that within the telecom industry, as we've been discussing in the hyperscale debate as well, we've got many different cycles of investment required. We've got that fundamental fiber infrastructure, we've got the towers, we've got the spectrum, all of which run at very different cycles. And of course, compared to the cycle of investment for the apps community, completely different. So actually, are we looking at a stratification of investment? Because we do want to get connectivity out to everyone, that global ambition to have everybody connected. So how do we fund it going forward? Do governments need to get involved? Are the private equities obviously are getting involved as well? So just a question of where does the investment come from and how do the telcos build those things out with that investment in the future?
Thanks, Chris. And our second motion today is investors will drive a separation of the industry into an infraco and servco model. And here's a summary of what Chris and Graham argued for when we introduced the debates last week.
The availability of finance from third parties, the drive from people investing in tower infrastructures, in third-party fiber infrastructures, is all changing the dynamic and the way in which funding is coming in. Fundamentally, we need to drive the right investment to get the right infrastructure and the right services into place to support the digital future.
This whole infraco and servco thing, I mean, it sounds great, doesn't it? But it's something that's, dare I say it, being dreamt up in a smoke-filled room by maybe bankers, management consultants, regulators, people who don't really understand how the telco industry works and how telco technology works. If you separate the physical infrastructure from the service provision, then you're basically just going to slow things down. You're going to slow down innovation and differentiation. And in the end, the customers will suffer.
Well, we'll soon find out the results of the viewer vote on this final motion. But before we do, we have time for one more round of questions. Our industry guests are still with us, so let's get right to it. Ray, over to you for our first question for this second debate.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Guy. Well, we're going to go straight into the first question from the gallery guests here, and it's from Kevin Hutchins at Juniper Networks. So, Kevin, over to you.
Thanks again, Ray. I appreciate it. I think on this topic of moving to separating a service co and a network infraco, I guess the question, it's two parts. First, does it drive more opportunities for consolidation, especially in the network infraco side of that equation? And if so, will that be good for innovation? And will regulators even allow it? So I'd love to hear some thoughts on that.
Okay, yep, absolutely critical questions here. Guy, let's come back over to you and see if we've got any responses to that question.
Yes, thank you very much, Ray. Will it indeed drive consolidation? Any of our guests here like to pick up on the question asked? Great stuff. Thank you very much, Clayton. Let's go to you first.
I was hoping to be able to comment on something today, yeah. Of course, it's going to drive consolidation, right? This has already happened fundamentally. I think regulators across the world are recognizing that the infrastructure portion is where the monopoly lies, and it makes more sense to have that in one place where you can kind of monitor it and make sure it's done fairly. And that's where the asset class has been created that allows Canadian pension funds to build fiber out in New Zealand, and that's been super efficient and has worked really well. I think regulators would be very keen to see this happen. They'd love to see a bunch of competition, but frankly, that's just not going to play out. Multiple competing, essentially commodity service platforms are not going to kind of run for the next 100 years. You're going to end up with regional networks. They'll be super efficient, and they'll be financed by pension funds from somewhere else.
Thank you, Clayton. Great views. Anybody else like to come to us? Chris, we haven't heard from you for a while in terms of the debate. Let's come to you.
I agree with Clayton. I think that long-term investment, that annuity return on fiber infrastructure in the ground, it's civil works, it's 20, 30-year returns, which telcos have traditionally not done. We need to consolidate. I think it raises the question of government involvement as well as regulation. And it certainly raises the question of competition. And it's interesting to note that the two of the biggest markets where 5G is taken off most quickly is where they only have three major providers, the US and China. and South Korea as well. So actually the competition that we've been pushing allegedly for the benefit of customers in many parts of Europe, I think really is not driving that longer term investment. You look at the amount of fiber in the ground, it's very patchy. And I think we're struggling to build out that infrastructure in the way that it needs to be built for society as a whole. So I think this raises that broader question of sustainability that we talked about in the previous debate. And I think ultimately the investors will decide where the funding goes.
Thank you, Chris. Tim, can I come to you as well? Because we haven't spoken to you yet in the debate, and I feel you've been a bit left out here. From your perspective, and I think you're joining us from Kenya today, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I'm in Nairobi. I should actually be in Addis because we're working at the moment on the market liberalization of Ethiopia telecommunications. And I can promise you that the incumbent there, Ethiotel, has no interest whatsoever in separating out its infrastructure from its services. So it's perhaps wishful thinking in some parts of the world.
Thank you very much, Tim. Jehanne, let's pop over to you in the luxury of Europe.
Yeah, it seems it's a trend, let's say, in the market, and a lot of telcos are envisioning, and Orange is one of them, are envisioning to create a TowerCo. So it's a simple way to make this asset more valuable in terms of CapEx, in terms of operational model, and that's what we intend to do. But what I want to emphasize, it's also kind of good news for the environment. For example, we are also in a trend for network sharing. Of course, it's to optimize and to share the investment because in telcos such as us, the 3/4 of the CapEx are invested in the last mile, right? Either fiber or towers and antennas. So it's a huge amount of money, and network sharing is more and more the let's say, rule in Europe. It's quite pragmatic, and so it serves the environmental concern. So I want to emphasize that I think yes, it's a trend, and it serves few stakes, and so I consider, or we in Orange consider that it's good to leverage.
Thank you, and let's get the views from Johan as well.
So maybe a dark view on that, so to speak, right? You have enormous investments that needs to go in. Some states doing it better than others, right? But the way that we've looked at this from a hyperscaler perspective, right? We've kind of let other countries, if you take a European look from it, we've kind of let other countries solve our problems. You know, we don't get dirty in the lower levels. We've kept on networks, and we certainly invest in that, right? But you look at something like Google Fiber, talking about encroaching and so forth. I saw some reports, I can't remember which city it was, but within a couple of years, 30% of the city was run by Google Fiber, right? And I think the way we've done it on the hyperscaler side, I think Europe is just waiting for one of the hyperscalers to go in and put the fiber in for us. And I know that sounds a little dark, but I think that, these kind of companies are not just innovating, 10 times faster than telcos are. And now we're talking about involving states. If it's 10 times, then it's 20 times at this point. So I think that, again, we got to look at this from a very, very careful type of thing. Like, be careful what you wish for when you, like Danielle, like you're saying, go close, let them do the heavy lifting. Well, soon they'll be doing all the lifting.
Very interesting. Thanks very much for those insights. And Clayton, let's go back to you.
Can I just respond to that? I mean, I think you're absolutely right. If you wait, the hyperscalers will ultimately build it, right? And if the telcos, the kind of incumbent telcos, think that that's the way to deal with this, then they're incorrect. But I think there's a fundamental mismatch in the cash flows between what Google is trying to do and what you need in order to roll out fiber, right? Your paybacks are 10 or 12 or 15 years out, not in Q3 fundamentally. And, yes, Google Fiber did very well in a small number of cities, but it rapidly stopped, right? They're no longer really rolling it out. I think there's still 100 people in Google on the payroll doing that stuff, but it no longer really exists. So I think, what you're going to see is, yes, that asset class will get financed differently because it needs different cash flows to everything else. If you wait, of course, the hyperscalers will go and build it because it's not that complex to do and they have money, but they would prefer that somebody else did it efficiently.
Thank you, Clayton. And a quick response from Johan as well.
And you're completely right there, right? Mentioned the Q3. I think that's one of the issues on the telco side, right? Like some of these investments take a long time, and that goes for the hyperscalers as well. And maybe the lack of innovation that we sometimes see is some of that, quarterly type of, a new CEO that comes in and needs to show off within X months, not X years, which a lot of these types of investments that we're talking about, require. Therefore, telcos have always been comfortable with the fiber and the actual networking, but getting any type of services on top of that, and I'm thinking IoT, I'm thinking about the edge as well. That's where I think some of the fundamental issues lie. We don't have a, long term on those investments that needs to go beyond the fiber.
Thank you, Johan. And with that, I'll hand it back to Ray because we're getting some great insights from this side of the broadcast studio. What about your side?
Okay, thanks, Guy. Well, we're going to come back to Kevin for a brief comment to close this before we get on to our next question. So, Kevin, back over to you.
Well, I think it makes a lot of sense that, and the point that was made about it as an asset class with a long-term payoff makes a tremendous amount of sense. I think the part that I'm still maybe unclear about, though, is, if this becomes critical infrastructure that, let's say, commoditized and maybe managed by the regulators, will there be enough investment that keeps going into it to keep innovating there? Or will it ultimately become, more like traditional government services that become a bit stagnant with regards to that innovation? So I think it's a hard question for me to get my arms around, but I definitely see both sides of this one.
Okay, excellent. Thanks very much, Kevin. Okay, we're going to move on to the next question, and that comes from Mark Newman. He is Chief Analyst at the TM Forum. Mark, over to you.
Thanks, Ray. So my next question is part comment, part question. I'll try and make it more question, but when we talk about NetCo, ServCo, one of the starting points is we're talking about tower companies, but in my mind, what's happening with the tower company model, that's not really, in my mind, a real NetCo, ServCo model. It's just outsourcing your tower companies and that business being consolidated. When it comes to NetCo, ServCo, we're thinking more, I think, about models such as Openreach in the UK. Or we're thinking about separation of network from Telstra, for example, with the NBN. And I don't see any clear models applying in terms of what works. There doesn't seem to be a clear model for me in terms of what's going to work and what's not. So I guess my question to the panel would be, how do you see NetCo, ServCo playing out beyond outsourcing, selling off your towers?
Okay, great. Thanks, Mark. Well, Guy, over to you. I'm sure we're going to have some comment on this for sure.
Indeed. Thanks, Ray, and thanks, Mark, for the question. Clayton, this I'm going to come to you first because this fits in really nicely with the theme of our motion here. Your views on the infraco, servco models.
So I think you're absolutely right. Telco, tower outsourcing is fundamentally just a repeat of, hey, let's sell and lease back our exchange buildings. Isn't that a great idea? It's just a short-term cash flow management issue. It's not a great idea to point to Openreach or NBN and say these didn't work, because they were pretty terrible implementation is what we're talking about. The canonical example is New Zealand, where they did this split properly, and the value of the retail arm is now soaring in addition to the value of the servco arm at the same time. Done correctly, you unleash the value in both parts of these businesses, and they have different end goals, right? Telcos are operating a bit like, conglomerates from the 70s. They want to do everything, and you end up being very bad at a whole series of things instead of very good at a few things. And what the servco netco thing does is it focuses you on the stuff that you need to do, and you execute that well instead of trying to compete at every level. And it fixes your investment process as well, right? Part of what Openreach's issue is in the UK is that BT has a large, dividend that they have to pay as a group. And part of the group operates on a sort of quarterly net adds basis, and part of the group operates on a 30-year investment basis, and those two things don't mix. So if you separate them correctly, it works correctly. We'd obviously say in CityFibre, if you're just going to concentrate on the infrastructure, then you can make a great business, and we intend to do that. But elsewhere, I think you're right. The separation is at the infrastructure level, not a few assets like towers.
Thank you, Clayton. Any of our other guests like to comment on this separation model? Tim?
Yeah, I think separation between infrastructure and services works very well in textbooks. It doesn't tend to work very well in the real world. There aren't that many examples where it has worked well. It's usually imposed by regulators, and it can take years to really achieve. And I think the reality is it only works well if the company itself wants to go in that direction. Thanks.
Thank you. Chris, views from you.
Just a very quick comment. As we know in the telecom world, every country is different, every telco is different, and the involvement of government and the political level of interest in broadband specifically, whatever side of politics you are, there is an interest in getting that connectivity out to everyone in that country. And I think that political motivation is likely to shift, as we're seeing in Poland and we're seeing in Italy of late, is likely to drive it. And the pressure, even in the UK, to take Openreach out of the hands of BT. So I think the investors, to Clayton's point about that long-term investment versus the short-term investment, that's why the motion is around investors driving this change, because it's the return on those assets.
Thank you very much, Chris. Well, let's hand back to Ray, see if he's got any other viewpoints there, or we move on to the next question.
Okay, great, thanks. So I think we're going to go to a question that's come in from the audience. And that question is, should governments be directly investing taxpayers' money in shared physical communications network infrastructure? So this is about whether government should be directly investing. So let's over to you there, Guy, with that question.
Thanks, Ray. Yeah, opening up a big can here. Who would like to put their hand in this can of worms? Whether government should...
No.
Oh, Clayton, please save us.
That's my concise answer. I mean, we just point back to the NBN. That's the exact attempt to do that, and it's the poster child for how this stuff goes wrong. They can help. They can kind of point people in the right direction, but they shouldn't be picking winners.
Thank you. And I think Nigel wanted to come in as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of already happening, and it's I guess there's two sides of the same coin happening at the same time. You've got a recent article I was reading where SpaceX have just been awarded best part of $1 million to deliver internet access to rural locations across the US, I believe. So that's an example of government, and there's other funds in the US as well to try and address rural locations and the swapping out of equipment and all sorts of things. So governments, at least in one example, are already doing that. And then at the other side, we've got governments, if you take the UK example, very much rotating around things like Open RAN and trying to create a more diverse and resilient supply chain for the RAN. As a way of ensuring there aren't monopolies and so on, and in a way, I guess that also stimulates innovation. So I think I don't know the answer. I don't pretend to know the answer. I'd like to think that government shouldn't have to get involved, but I think there are cases where it's difficult to see the commercial proposition for private industry to foot the bill.
Indeed, thanks, Nigel. And Johan.
Yeah, just a quick comment on that. I think Nigel is completely right. There's going to be a certain level where the commercial side simply will not dig fiber. It just doesn't make sense commercially. And I think it becomes like a society, as in, if we want an equal society where there's, regardless of where you live, so to speak, you have the opportunity that other people have, then at some point government needs to step in or kind of force it, regulate it somehow so that, rural areas or areas where it simply doesn't fit the bill or make sense financially. Otherwise, we'll have a patchy type of network, and I think we see that in certain countries where that's not done.
Thank you, and let's get Jehanne's view as well.
Yeah, de facto, it's what they do in some areas where it's not profitable enough, and that's the public networks that we see, for example, in France. The other way to intervene that is maybe the most visible is the way they write their obligations in the frequency auctions, in the frequency allocations for the 5G, for example. What are the obligations that are set there? So I don't know if it helps from the investment standpoint, but at least it biased investment. And of course, it's meant to serve the consumer or the enterprise market. And to be a fair competition market. And at the end of the day, another example is some initiatives that are pushed by the European Commission, for example, or by a European set of actors. And I would quote Gaia-X, that is an initiative around the data management and a kind of multi-cloud way to manage the cloud offer, let's say. So it's three different ways that they may influence the investment, not intervening too sharply, because at the end of the day, it's a capitalistic business, right?
Indeed, indeed. Tim, do you see a different picture in Africa?
In Africa as a whole, certainly governments do need to help the market in very rural areas and remote areas. And so we do see some stimulation of the market. But I wanted to pick a different example, and that is the oil-rich countries that perhaps have more money on their hands than they know what to do with. And for them, with, say, a large sovereign wealth fund, do they invest in a new dam? Do they invest in a new road? Or do they invest in a fiber optic network for the future? So there may well be incentives for resource-rich countries to think about putting their money in profitable assets. Thanks.
Interesting. Yeah, thanks very much, Tim. Well, with that, I think we should hand back over to Ray.
Okay, great. Thanks, Guy. We're going to come to a quick comment from Marissa, and then we're going to go to our vote on the motion. So, Marissa, over to you.
So what we are seeing right now is that there are some governments that are and they have plans to invest in 5G networks, and that comes from investments from European Commission or other sources. But definitely we see that in the most advanced countries, probably it is a commercial driven, in a corporate driven, but in less smaller country is more government driven. So I will say, in order to address the underserved communities, in order to progress the countries, I think governments will invest in 5G and other technologies in order to bring the population and give more options to the people. So we definitely see governments, investing in these networks, and I think it's to the benefit of all the citizens.
Okay, great. Thanks, Marissa. Okay, we're going to come to a vote now on the question of the day, because we have run way over time. The red light is flashing. So let's have a reminder of what the motion is today, and we'll get the thumbs up and the thumbs down from the gallery. So the motion was investors will drive a separation of the industry into infrastructure companies and servco models. So let's see the vote from the gallery today. Thumbs up in favor of that motion. Thumbs down against. Okay, we've got 4 ups, four votes for the motion and 1 against. Thanks very much for voting. Guy, over to you. What's the mood in the studio there?
Thank you, Ray. Is it going to be 4-4 here as well? What do we all think? Do you think that investors will drive a separation of the industry into an infraco and servco model? Thumbs up if we agree, thumbs down if we disagree, thumbs in the middle if we just really can't decide. Up. Well, it's more ups. We have got 4 fours here, 4 fours and 1 against. Well, that is what we think. Thank you very much. But what about our audience? Was our motion carried or defeated? Well, for the last time this year, it's time for the industry to decide. Oh, carried. Well, there you have it. Motion carried, but by a relatively slim margin. Something's gone wrong with Ray's picture. I don't know what it is. There must be some bizarre fluctuation of the signal there. Can't see on earth what's happening here. 58% to 42%. Although I know the votes were moving widely for this one, and it was level at one stage. There must have been a late surge of support. Chris, your thoughts on the outcome?
As with many things, Guy, at the end of the day, it's follow the money. You know, governments are interested in money, the telcos are interested in money. It's return on investment, and balancing that with the national interest of getting that plain old broadband, if I might bang my new acronym again, out there into the digital marketplace. That the money will ultimately drive it. It will take different cycles of timings in different country markets, but ultimately the telecom infrastructure for any country should be, I wouldn't say owned by the government, but it should be perhaps co-owned in a different sort of model. But the investment community will ultimately drive this, because there's different returns on investment for different pieces of what forms ultimately the telecom infrastructure for every country.
Thank you, Chris. Well, I don't know what to make of this one, really. I am sitting on the fence. It's a very nice, comfortable fence, and I'm going to sit on it. This is a real tricky one, and I'm not surprised the vote was close. And I think there's a very good chance that investors will drive through such a separation, but this could be a decade-long process. On the other hand, I just honestly don't think this is something that most telcos really desire. Ray, if I can call you Ray, or do I have to call you Father Ray, any final thoughts from you on the motion?
Well, the view from Lapland is that I think we might have got the same response 20 years ago to this question, but I actually think that this separation of infraco and servco will be driven by forces from cloud services and cloud infrastructure rather than investors. Ho, ho, ho.
Thank you very much, Ray. Ho, ho, ho. Don't forget the ho, ho, ho. So that's the second debate concluded, and indeed it's the end of our third and final day of the Great Telco Debate Live. The first live show is now available to watch on demand on the TelecomTV website, and this one and Wednesdays will be made available very soon. Our elves are working flat out to make that happen for you. You can also watch all 6 of our witness statement programs, which add more views and perspectives to the debate topics. A very big thank you to all our guests for taking part, not only in our 3 programs this week, but also in the supporting videos last week. And of course, to all our sponsors and partners, we really appreciate your support. To borrow a line from the closing credits of all the James Bond movies, TelecomTV will return. We'll be back in 2021 with an expanded lineup of video-based interviews, debates and specials, all part of the DSP Leaders Programme. And who knows, maybe we'll be able to meet up again in person. We hope you've enjoyed the Great Telco Debate 2020. Until next year, from all of us here at TelecomTV, here's to a happier new year. Goodbye.